What's up, guys? I'm Chad Barnes, and welcome to the channel. Here, it's all about real car talk, from simple fixes to smart driving tips and keeping your ride in top shape. If that sounds good to you, go ahead and give the video a thumbs up. Hit that subscribe button, and make sure you watch all the way through. There's a lot of good stuff coming. Let's get to it.
Braking system. The brakes of the A6 C7 are really no surprises. With discs of 320 and 345 mm, there are single-piston calipers, as simple and reliable as possible. Such put on all cars with 4-cylinder motors and on the weakest versions with V6 motors, petrol 2, 8 FSI and diesel 3, 0 TDI. Even on cars in versions with 3.0 TFSI engine, S6 versions and with 333 horsepower diesel engine with 356 mm discs were put twin piston calipers with floating bracket, quite simple design and with quite reasonable prices for all components. Original 320 mm discs cost less than 9,000 rubles, pads, twice cheaper. And the choice of non-original components for all brake variants is very wide. There are no special problems with the resource. It is possible to note a tendency of big discs to warping when getting into puddles, but it is peculiar to almost all brakes of this size. The A6 version is equipped with 6-piston ATE discs with 400 mm floating discs. As an option, discs of this size could be ceramic, but cars with them become less and less, because each such disc costs 402,000 rubles against 21,000 for the usual cast iron. If ceramics wear out or start cracking, the second and third owners of these cars very rarely kept them, preferring cheaper discs. By the way, such discs crack very often. There are no non-original ceramic discs in nature, and simple cast iron ones in non-original version are more expensive than the original. In general, brakes on A6 are expensive, and there are no loopholes to reduce expenses on them. On the rear axle, the brakes are ventilated disc brakes on all versions with disc diameters from 300 to 356 mm. The parking brake mechanism is realized by means of an electric actuator with a gear motor on the caliper itself. The system works reliably enough, and the high price of the original mechanism is leveled by low chances of failure and availability of inexpensive non-original elements. Well, the A6 can also have ceramics on the rear axle and with a diameter of 370 mm. Otherwise, the caliper differs only in size. Failures of hoses, tubes, sensors or ABS blocks are too early to expect. Even in cars before restyling, these brake elements are usually in order. Detail original price of non-original 2 brake system front brake pads 8 812 86 555 and K2 140 brake pads. Rear 7 853 84 132 HDE 523 brake disc front 320 by 38 202 Bosch 4 124 Fenix 2 691 brake disc rear 300 by 12 6 921 82 662 Fenix 1 921 handbrake actuator 39 149 NTY 2 747 February 25 341 suspension. The suspension scheme has not changed fundamentally in comparison with the previous generations. The front suspension is a branded multilink, and the rear suspension is also multilink, but quite typical for this class of scheme. Many people have heard that these suspensions of Audi are expensive and break, but in practice their resource is very good. However, there is one nuance. The front suspension on the C7 is completely new, all elements have been replaced. On the last generation, all levers except for the suspension trunnion, which is individual for each model and configuration, were interchangeable with the suspension levers of 1994. The only thing that was changed was the diameter of the ball bearing pin of the straight arm. Suspension was brought to the mind, but the appearance of new parts in the C7 generation led to the appearance of new child diseases. The factory version of the suspension started knocking by about 40,000 kilometers. The knocking was not strong, but it was very annoying in a quiet cabin. In this case, the warranty changed the stabilizer rods to metal, which helped very rarely, and the silent block of the crooked lower arm to a reinforced one with the number 4H04078183B from a heavier A8. Straight arm or changed as a whole, or in the case of wear of the silent blocks changed only them. After these manipulations, the knock usually did not bother the owners for a long time, but it should be noted that in winter time, The new reinforced silent block work the bumps hard. At anywhere of stabilizer struts or steering knuckles it generated a small knocking and as a consequence, further troubleshooting. These problems were especially noticeable on low-profile wide tires with hard rolling. In general, this is the end of characteristic problems. If the owner has a healthy amount of poffagism and does not look for problems where there are none, the resource of suspensions can be considered outstanding. In Moscow, many people drive up to 150 to 200,000 mileage without replacement of levers and silent blocks. But it is possible only if the springs have not sagged yet. And it happens quite often, they have no safety margin, so that gradual sagging and even broken coils at mileage from 150,000 kilometers is not rare. But the resource of shock absorbers in A6 C7 is surprisingly high. The car could have air suspension as an option. It is quite reliable and most cars do not have serious problems with it, and only the copies of the first years of production slowly begin to have difficulties with leaks and compressor life. Most of the problems of air suspension are leaks on receiver fittings, failures of body position sensors, freezing valve block and, less often, compressor wear. The racks of this generation are reliable enough to withstand 150 and even more thousand kilometers of mileage. Even cars in commercial operation with mileage over 300,000 can still have original parts. However, in case of breakdowns, you should be prepared for the fact that a quick repair will be expensive. Original racks will cost from 160,000 and if you take directly from the manufacturer, then 40,000 cheaper. And there are no substitutes for them. Both racks and shock absorbers can be given to restore. The cost of work starts from 12,000 rubles, but it will be difficult to get a same guarantee. In case of compressor breakdowns, in most cases you can do with replacement of the working group, which is done even by the Chinese. In general, the pneumatics on the C7 is no different from any other. It is still quite reliable, but the chances of getting to expensive repair are growing every day. It should be noted that the car has not the strongest hub bearings, which serve less than other suspension elements. Already after 100,000 mileage increased noise can notify that it is time to buy new hubs. There are no difficulties with replacement, but the spare parts themselves are expensive, the bearing comes only together with the hub. It is especially unpleasant that rear bearings fail most often, which cost twice as much as front bearings in non-original version. Detail original price of non-original 2 suspension front support 14063 Lemford 6023 February 4 271. Front upper support 5916 HDE 1775 February 2 913 Front shock absorber 11312 Monroe 4 204 KYB 4 405 Air strut assembly 166 684 Bilstein 122 793 Front hub 12 843 FAG 4 552 Haft 3 357 Rear lower support 27 359 Patron 8059 NTY 6909 Steering. The steering system on the A6 C7 is always with an electric rack, but in two variants, in the form of a conventional rack and in the form of an active one. However, they have common problems. The main one is not very successful dust covers of the rack. Over time, they crack, and water starts to penetrate inside. There is not much grease there, and corrosion not only quickly kills the shaft with the electric motor, but also spoils the electrical equipment. Especially the control unit connectors suffer, and sometimes the unit itself fails. Sometimes you may encounter malfunctions in the form of lost firmware or bitten steering column gimbal, but all this is treated much cheaper than a water-killed rack. Common problems. There are no serious breakdowns with standard motors in the Audi A6 C7's transmission. Joints and reducers serve for a long time. Rear gearbox and cardan shafts of all-wheel drive versions are also extremely reliable. Their resource is limited only at powerful S6 and RS6. The only weak point is the cover of the driveshaft universal joint, which dries out and cracks after 5 years of operation. It is better to keep an eye on its condition, because the joint is not available separately, and if it fails, it will not be possible to replace it quickly and easily. Mechanical boxes. It is difficult to find A6 with a manual, but the 0B1 and 0CS series boxes do not cause serious problems. It is necessary to be prepared only for the fact that dual-mass flywheels have a very limited service life, and the price of these parts bites. Automatic boxes on the A6 are a lot, depending on the type of drive, power and year of manufacture could put one of. For automatic transmissions, front-wheel drive cars before restyling were equipped with a variator of the second generation of Audi production of 0AW VL381 series. Most all-wheel drive cars before the restyling received a 7-speed pre-selective gearbox DSG Series 0B5, aka DL501, as an automatic transmission. After restyling, the variator on front-wheel drive cars and all-wheel drive with 4-cylinder engines was replaced by a 7-speed DSG Series DL382-7F. Well, and the most powerful versions with engines with a torque of more than 500 Nm were supposed to 8-speed automatic transmission. ZF Series 0BK, it is also 8 HP 55AF. The same gearbox can be found with any engines on cars for regional markets outside Europe. In particular, cars from the USA were equipped with it even with 2.0 TSI engines. Since most cars in Russia are dealer cars, it is simply unrealistic to find such a variant. Contrary to popular belief that variators are fragile and weak, the VL381 proved to be very reliable. It is designed for motors with torque up to 380 Nm and its design is very well developed. The main problems with the gearbox arise due to gross non-observance of operating conditions and from the breakdowns as a typical one. They note only the failure of the rotor speed sensor G195. However, to repair the sensor it is necessary to open the control unit and unsolder the sensor, but it is a well-mastered operation. The block also contains 2 oil pressure sensors and an input shaft speed sensor, but they fail very rarely. Typical mistakes of owners of cars with this variator are rare oil changes and towing the car with the engine not running. The first leads to rapid failure of solenoids, bearings and clutch starter pack, the second, to the wedge of the starter pack and scoring of the working surface of the cones. Transmission overloading is relatively easy to handle, and scoring due to overloading on cold or torsional vibrations is rare. At first glance, the design differs little from the first generation of Audi variators. This one is also chain-driven and it uses a friction starter pack rather than a GDT. But in fact, almost all elements here are new. The main weak points of the first generation in the form of unsuccessful control unit and failure-prone lubrication system of the starter pack with ejection pump have been significantly improved. And to increase the transmitted torque and service life, the cone surface was improved and the operating algorithms were optimized. The gear ratio of the variator changes smoothly at low load, but when the load increases, the chain moves into one of the 8 fixed gears and the maximum torque can only be achieved in this position. When operating at maximum torque the gear ratio does not change, the motor pull is reduced to shift the zone. The cone surface has a slightly more complex profile optimized for this type of load variation. This has allowed to increase the guaranteed life of the chain up to about 200,000 mileage, and in case of gentle operation it can withstand more than 350,000. So on this variator it can be considered eternal, and the majority of breakdowns occur due to malfunctions of the lubrication system and failures of speed sensors. At the same time, the problem with the sensor and wear of the starter pack is often caused by overheating. Standard oil heat exchanger on the box at mileage of 150 to 200,000 is often clogged and the temperature of oil in the box begins to rise. When it regularly rises to 120 degrees, problems with the ejection pump and control unit begin. It is funny that the situation is often saved by another malfunction. The fact is that in the antifreeze supply pipe of the heat exchanger there is a thermostat which prevents the supply of antifreeze until the motor is fully warmed up. The heat capacity of the box is quite large and its heating in a mild climate is not so important. After 3 years of operation, the thermostat sours and most often in the open position. In general, it is recommended to remove the thermostat so that the variator at least a little warmed up in frosts at once and its temperature did not rise above the engine temperature, but here everything is relatively successful. The only bad thing is that 2-liter gasoline engines and especially diesels with a constantly open cooling circuit of the automatic transmission warm up much longer instead of 5 to 8 minutes all 20, even under load. By the time it was installed in the A6 C7, the 7-speed DSG DL501 series was already out of its infancy and its main problems had been eliminated. It received an integrated fine filter of the hydraulic part, improved mechatronic and sensor unit. In the mechanical part of the improvements can be noted more durable bearings and reinforced housing at the output of the drives. The early variators broke the bearing seat. The average life of clutch packs increased up to 120,000 and the maximum one could be 250. The earliest versions of the box could have relatively weak mechatronic units where the circuit board failed due to temperatures and vibrations. This led to failure of the clutch system sensors. Unfortunately, the relatively high loads and recommended oil change schedule means that dirty oil and heat exchanger fouling can lead to higher temperatures and failures over time. In the case of gasoline motors, it is highly recommended that the oil change interval in the hydraulics be reduced to 30 to 40,000 mileage, and in the mechanical part it can be changed at least once every 60,000. When changing the oil, it is mandatory to change both filters, internal filter in the sump and fine filter. On the earliest variants of the gearbox, an external fine filter unit could be used. In case of mechatronic failures, the clutch pack suffers first of all. With forks there are usually no problems. In general, this gearbox is very reliable if properly maintained. But if it has been serviced not quite competently, the need for repair may arise at mileage from 150,000 kilometers. But, as in the case with other DSG boxes, checking by scanner allows to reveal almost all possible problems. The boxes DL382, which appeared after restyling, differ significantly in design. They have a much lighter mechanical part and a completely different block of mechatronics. And, fundamentally, they have an electric oil pump instead of mechanical, and sometimes there are problems with oil pressure due to its failure, sensor errors or hydraulic accumulator failure. The main problem, oddly enough, occurs in the mechanics. At rare oil change or appearance of vibrations from the double-mass flywheel dies a weak primary shaft bearing, and in front wheel drive cars also very weak differential bearings. Electronics of the box is also not ideal. Failures occur regularly, but the unit is relatively inexpensive to repair, and if the mechatronic has not killed the clutch pack, the repair will not be ruinous. Most problems with mechatronic are caused by overheating. The box requires redesign of the cooling system. The standard cooling system with gasoline engines heats the oil to 120 degrees, and with diesel engines the temperature of the box rarely rises above 90, so the problems on diesel cars are much less. Another problem with these boxes is the maintenance routines. There is no oil change procedure for it, and failures of the oil pump and mechatronic at mileage over 120,000, according to the service, are often caused by its contamination. Unfortunately, the new box is much less reliable than DL501, and it is much more expensive to repair and replace. Its diagnostics should be approached much more carefully. And, of course, in addition to scanner diagnostics, it is worth checking the operation of the automatic transmission both when cold and after full warm-up. The 8-speed ZF gearbox is found here only in combination with very torquey motors and very rarely. It is absolutely useless to judge about its resource on the example of S6, but some conclusions can be made on the example of other cars. In general, it is a successful unit, but not bad resource in normal mode of driving is combined with reduced full resistance at annealing. Those modes, which were well tolerated by 6-speed ZF, new boxes tolerate much worse. Drifting and constant starts at the floor with smoke, it is not for it. It has a noticeably weaker mechanical part, so the chances of damaging drums are higher. And the GDT fails easily when overloaded. If you buy American with this box and 2-liter engine, there are great chances that it will pass more than 250,000 even without timely oil change before the first repair. In any case, it is very praised over the ocean. Four-wheel drive in this generation, all-wheel drive is only classic Quattro with a torsen center differential. On the next generation Ultra began to be put, but there are no such gifts on C7 even after restyling. There are no questions to reliability of the drive. Some breakdowns are possible only at mileage over 400,000 and with the most powerful motors. True, on RS6 rear drives can be cut off, but hardly such problems concern normal drivers. Motors. Common problems: motors on the A6 C7 have become even hotter, the number of plastic fittings has increased, as well as the amount of plastic in the underhood. At the same time, the radiator package here is very dense. Fans on all engines are only electric with a threshold of inclusion over 100 degrees. As a result, degradation of plastic goes fast enough, and after many works on the cars at the age of literally 5 years it will be necessary to change a heap of not expensive pipes, or to restore them kolhozno. For some reason they put a bag with silica gel in the expansion tank, and after the same 5 years of operation the bag spreads and contaminates the system with spent capsules. This is fraught with clogged radiator of the heater and heat exchanger of the box and failure of the automatic transmission due to overheating. And also, early pump failure. It is especially unpleasant in case of 2-liter diesel engines of EA288 series. There is an expensive pump with a complex drive of switching off. Gasoline engines. Base gasoline motors of EA888 family can be found on the car of 2 generations. The first one includes 2-liter engines of CAEB 211 horsepower, CDNB 180 horsepower, and CAED 220 horsepower series. The second, CYPA, CYNB, CYPB 240, 252 HP, and 1.8-liter engines of CYGA 190 horsepower series. These are 4-cylinder engines in a cast iron block with turbocharging and direct injection, with chain timing and mandatory balancer shafts in the block. To distinguish one generation from another is very simple visually. The third generation has 2-phase adjusters, and even if the power is specified in the points incorrectly, the difference is visible at once. In fact, there are much more external differences, but this is the most obvious. I've already written a whole big piece about these engines, but they are the most common series of engines on this generation of A6. So I'll pay extra attention to them. Motors are complex, and all weaknesses are bound to show themselves at some point or another. EA888 Gen 2 was used in the A6 up to the restyling. Mostly 211 horsepower motors with KKK03 turbine, AVS, Audi valve lift system, and Hitachi fuel injection system are found. With the oil appetite on this line of engines, the manufacturer fought quite successfully until the restyling. Approximately after 2013, the motors do not have outright oiling. Replacement of the piston group and modernization of ECG helped. But in earlier versions and engines operated with long intervals of oil change in urban mode, after overheating, oil will be consumed. And other disadvantages have not gone anywhere: very unstable resource of timing, frank problems with balancer shafts and front support, with Zakixovka intake valves and similar trifles. In perfect condition these motors are not as often as we would like, and they are often said something like it's a turbo, they must consume oil. Fortunately, this is not the case. A serviceable motor of this generation with a new piston does not consume oil. Another characteristic problem with these engines is pump leaks. Corruption of the plastic part of the housing or even cracks on it is very common, and in this case it is recommended to replace the pump with a modified one, with the letter P in the part code, or a non-original metal one. They are available on sale. In general, the motor is not bad in characteristics, but in operation it shows itself quite troublesome. It often needs complex repair with elimination of all defects, with installation of a piston group of a new sample, finalization of timing and VKG. Attempts to eliminate problems one at a time usually lead to prolonged agony, often ending with a jump in the timing chain due to broken balancers or a large repair due to a backed camshaft support or shaft beds. A complete rebuild, done in time, usually costs less than 150,000 rubles. Such work is done on the stream due to the mass of motors, although in any case they require both time and money. After restyling, the car received engines of EA888 Gen 3 generation in 2 displacement variants. These engines have been significantly improved. They have a lighter cylinder block, thinner crankshaft journals, and new design adjustable oil pump, exhaust manifold integrated into the cylinder head, IHI turbines and new fuel equipment with combined injection. In general, this is a much more successful version of the engine. It eliminates several important shortcomings of the previous generation of these motors. The new bearing balancer shafts have no lubrication problems and act as a filter separator in the ECG system, significantly reducing oil intake and extending oil life. The timing life is greatly improved due to no balancer shaft issues and modernization of all other components. No problem with intake clogging. Catalytic converters last much longer due to better warm-up performance and shorter warm-up times in general. Minus in comparison with the previous generation is actually only one, due to the use of low viscosity oils and lower oil pressure. Due to the new adjustable oil pump, cases of scoring of crankshaft liners have become more frequent, and scoring of the support and camshaft beds have become massive. Fortunately, this problem can be cured only by using more viscous oils in summer, at least SAE 30 instead of the recommended SAE 20. Although more viscous oils are recommended for tuning, disconnecting the first stage of the oil pump by software or disconnecting the pressure sensor on the pump, after which it goes into emergency mode with maximum pressure. Provided that the timing is changed at a mileage of 120 to 150,000 and a successful choice of oil, such a motor causes much less trouble than EA888 Gen 2. Of course, while the mileage of these units is still mostly low, but we can already conclude that EA888 Gen 3 is much better than the second generation of this series. And when choosing a car with a 2.0 TSI engine before the restyling and after, the choice is unambiguous. Cars with a 2.8 FSI motor-coded CHVA or later CVPA from the EA837 lineup are surprisingly common. Buyers were sure that the atmospheric V6 is more reliable than supercharged motors. Unfortunately, expectations were not met. A Lucilevy block of cylinders was prone to scoring at any problems with fuel equipment and it even on the second generation of motors, which was installed on the Generation C7, reliability did not shine. And cold start still remained a problem. Gasoline significantly eroded the oil film at temperatures below West 20 degrees Celsius. The catalytic converter was not happy either, it failed and began to crumble early. As a result, mass scoring of blocks. They tried to solve the problem by lowering the operating temperature and replacing the thermostat during the warranty period. This did not help much. Overheating with detonation and pouring injectors are only some of the causes of scoring. Intake valve sticking, leaking valve seals, soot in the combustion chamber, detonation due to timing failure were still there. Only replacement of the block or its liner allowed to eliminate the problem. However, many owners still drive on the rear blocks with knocking pistons and consider oil consumption and knocking as a norm. Scuffing is only half of all problems of this line. EA837 engines have a very complex chain timing mechanism with AVS system and location of chains and phaser regulators on the flywheel side. And there are 4 chains, and the system of calipers and tensioners would be more suitable for a museum exhibit, but not for a serial motor. Chain knocking and even slippage occur already at mileage over 100,000, despite even all the improvements of the mechanism. When the mileage is closer to 200,000, chains must be changed. This operation is not cheap, requiring removal of the gearbox and removal of the motor, because at such mileage it usually needs a complete resealing and even overhaul. The AVS system does not cause any major problems. Its components work reliably up to at least 200,000. Nevertheless, it is complicated, and when repairing engines, it increases both the price of work and the possibility of a mechanic's error. Besides, the system of lubricant supply to the cylinder head is realized through a 2 mm hole under the chain tensioner block. And this hole is sometimes clogged. As a result, the cylinder head is sent for repair and camshafts have to be replaced. You can buy a car with a 2.8-liter motor only after cylinder endoscopy. If the motor is chambered in cast iron, it is quite a successful option, albeit not the cheapest in operation. Engines 3.0 TFSI, for all the similarity of characteristics, belong to different generations. Engines CGWB, CGXB, CGWD and CTUA with an output of 300 to 333 horsepower belong to the EA837 generation, as well as 2.8-liter motors, and the motors of CREH models after 2014 of the same power to the EA837 Evo lineup, significantly improved. And even though in characteristics the motors are very similar, but in operation they are completely different. They are 6-cylinder V-shaped engines with a volume of 3 liters in an aluminum block with a compressor and liquid intercooler. And, of course, direct injection. Scuffing is as typical for EA837 motors as for 2.8-liter motors. The reasons are generally exactly the same: aluminized block, high temperatures, detonation, dusty catalytic converter, constant oil loss from the ECG and oil seals due to rapid aging of all rubber elements and extremely unsuccessful implementation of the direct injection system. Under the recall, company motors were changed the thermostat to a more cold one and were strongly advised to reduce oil change intervals. It was even changed firmware, but the motor did not become reliable. In addition to the major problems, there were complaints about the clutch in the Eaton compressor drive and compressor screw wear due to bearing failure at high mileage. There have also been problems with failures of the electric intercooler pump. But all of these are generally less significant than timing and scuffing. Buying a car with such an engine is not recommended. It is expensive and extremely troublesome. The more so that it will be cheaper to buy a car with an already finalized EA837 Evo engine. 6 months before the restyling of the model, the 3.0 TFSI motors were replaced by the new EA837 Evo range. Externally, the motors are very similar, their technical characteristics are the same, but the design differences are enormous. For starters, the new motors have thin-walled cast iron liners from the factory. And even though the piston group has been lightened, there are no problems with scoring. They occur only in rare cases of fuel equipment failure or overheating. Here the oil rings were changed, the previous ones still had a tendency to stick. The engine was seriously improved timing, improving the calipers, chains and tensioners. The injection system became combined. In addition to the injectors of direct injection, there were injectors in the intake manifold. This immediately solved the problems of valve sticking, cold starting and warming up at low temperatures. New injectors of direct injection became much more reliable. Leaks are not encountered until now, while the first-generation injectors were replaced even under warranty. To reduce fuel consumption, the compressor was made disconnectable at low load. Phase controllers were introduced on the exhaust shafts, the ECG was improved, a variable displacement pump was installed and the engine as a whole was redesigned. As a result, scuffing became a thing of the past, timing life became much more stable, and chain jumping at mileage up to 150,000 became a thing of the past. However, the records on chain resource do not break anyway, but at quiet operation it is possible to count on 200,000. And in general, the engine has become better and more reliable. It is almost unreal to bring the last generation to this level. Even after lasing of the block and replacement of the piston will remain a lot of weak points, which are eliminated only by buying newer components from the Evo motor. And as a pleasant bonus, EA837 Evo have an excellent reserve on boosting, from the standard 300 forces to more than 500 with modest investments. Of course, don't forget that this is still a complex and not cheap to run engine that requires professional and frequent maintenance. It will never be cheap to operate, but for a premium car it is a relatively practical option. The 4.0 TSI, 420 or 450 HP engines on the S6 are coded CEUC or CTGE, and the 560 horsepower ones on the RS6 are coded CRDB and CWUC. They belong to the EA824 Gen 3 family. These aluminum block motors are very similar to the EA837 lineup, but with revised timing and fuel equipment. They do not have factory cast iron liners, but many motors are lined in preparation for serious tuning. The main advantage from the point of view of potential owners is the highest potential of the block, crankshaft, connecting rods and control system. Tuning over 700 horsepower even on a standard aluminum block is not fatal for them. It is possible to remove even more than 1,200 horsepower, but scuffing is possible even here. The motors are characterized by not very successful design of timing and very small channel of oil supply in the cylinder head. However, usually such motors are not economized on operation, and the car reciprocates. To take a car with such motor on the secondary market for everyday use after races is fraught with big expenses, but if the task is to get something of class for 500 horsepower, it is a reasonable option. In its class, this engine is one of the best. Diesel engines are a bit easier in the sense that they are very widely represented on other cars of the company. Diesel 2-liter engines of EA189 and EA288 lines are one of the most reliable engines of the concern at the moment. But it should be remembered that the firmware on EA189 was changed after the Dieselgate, and in terms of dynamics and consumption, They have not changed for the better. EA288 is a bit stifled from the beginning, but it has a complex two-circuit cooling system with a disconnectable pump, due to which it warms up quickly and is characterized by very soft operation. The EA897 and EA897 Evo 3-liter diesel engines are very similar to the second-generation EA896, which I have already reviewed. In the review of the VW Touareg, the EA897 engines are characterized by new Bosch fuel equipment with piezo injectors and only 2 chains instead of 4. EGR and the entire intake have been updated. The engines have removed a separate belt for the drive of the fuel injector, and now it is driven by the same chain as the vacuum and oil pumps. Diesel oxidation neutralizer and particulate filter have been used on the diesels in this range. It is a pity that the gas intake to the EGR system is made before the particulate filter and not after, which could solve the problem with intake pollution. The variants, which meet -6 standard, have urea neutralization system, but we have not sold such cars officially. Diesel version with 313 horsepower, engine code CGQB, has a double supercharger of extremely complex design, but otherwise it is the same. Good old 3-liter diesels as before, but more reliable and economical. If well maintained, they do not suffer from frequent breakdowns and enjoy phenomenal fuel efficiency. But the new 897 EVA range, introduced at the end of 2015, is no longer so unambiguously good. A small change in the form of installing a separate oil pump with a separate chain drive can lead to serious failures after 3 to 4 years. The oil pump itself and its drive prove to be unreliable, and by 80 to 100,000 miles the motor may be left without oil pressure. We should not expect any other major troubles from it yet. There are too few statistics of oil pump failures to say how widespread the problem is, but due to the seriousness of the consequences, it is worth to be suspicious of any extraneous noises and check the condition of oil in the engine for chips. Detail original price of non-original 2 engine radiator 6 CYL 22922 AVA 9472 Nissans 12095 timing. Chain 2, 0 EA888 Gen 2 3503 HDE 2093 Febby 4 487 timing set EA888 Gen 2 not available ENA 6088, only camshaft chain with tensioner. And calipers, Febby 28 521, complete set for replacement, turbocharger for EA888 Gen 2 not available BW 65 809 KKK 73 889 to take or not to take. Of course, this generation A6 is a nice car in every way. It has a very high-quality interior, quite reliable electrics and hardy, though sometimes expensive in repair, chassis. Even variators, which many people are afraid of, on A6 C7 show themselves only from the best side. But with motors the situation is not so simple. Even among relatively reliable motors you will have to look for a variant not killed by previous owners. And in general, no matter how you look at it, but A6 is a premium German sedan, so it will not be possible to maintain it for pennies. It is possible, of course, to drive on this automobile till the last, until it dies, and then try to sell it to the next owner. Of course, it will be much cheaper, but a little dishonest and a little sacrilegious. And even scarier will be not to sell such a car, but to accidentally buy it. Therefore, checking A6 C7 before buying is a must. It is better to spend on qualitative diagnostics than on eternal and very expensive fight with remnants of German premium. In conclusion, the Audi A6 C7 stands out for its robust all-wheel drive system, which is known for its durability and reliability. While many of the engines in this model may face issues over time, the all-wheel drive remains a strong point that is less prone to failure. Understanding these characteristics can help potential buyers make informed decisions. Ultimately, with proper maintenance, the Audi A6 C7 can provide a rewarding driving experience for years to come. Thank you for watching, and be sure to subscribe for more insights on automotive topics.